How to build responsive Angular dashboards with Wijmo, Part 3, FlexGrid and FlexMap. Welcome to the third video in our Building Responsive Angular Dashboard series. In the last video, we demonstrated how to utilize Wijmo's chart components, such as bar and pie charts, to show users data in various formats. We also added gauges to show visitors from different countries compared to the total number from the top active country. In this video, we'll integrate Wijmo's FlexMap control, which, along with GeoJSON data, can be used to render maps, breaking data down by country, region, and more. We'll also add tooltips to various countries to show user activity. Finally, we'll integrate FlexGrid, Wijmo's Datagrid control, to display data on recent individual users and any issues that have been reported to the system. First, create a new component to load and render the FlexMap control and call it map-info. Once the component is generated, create some data to show statistics from each country. In this case, the country name, the average response time, total page views, and issues reported. We'll also create one method to return our data and a second to validate whether or not a country is included in our data. With the data ready, let's set up the markup before we handle writing TypeScript. Inside the map-info.component.html file, initialize the FlexMap control and FlexMap's GeoMap layer and color scale. The GeoMap layer is the actual rendering of the map within the control, while the color scale determines how to color the various elements of the rendered map. For the GeoMap layer, assign the GeoJSON data to it and add an event that will fire whenever the map is initialized and receives the map data. For the color scale, assign it a set of colors, values to bind to, and a scale, each of which we'll define in the next steps. With the GeoJSON assigned to the map layer and the data in the service ready to be loaded in, let's set up the map-info.component.ts file, which will allow users to interact with the FlexMap. Inside the TypeScript file, we need to make several imports from Angular's core module: onInit, output, viewChild, event emitter. We also need to import our data service and two Wijmo files, palettes and FlexMap. Palettes will be used to color our map, while the FlexMap import will allow us to modify the map component we're displaying. Next, create all the variables to be used alongside the map component. The FlexMap, FlexMap data, data map, page view map, and issues reported map are all used to set up the map, define the regions, and hold the data that will be displayed in each country's tooltip. The tooltip content selected country, selected ID, and hit test info are used to track the mouse location within the control and determine what content to show in the tooltip based on what the user clicks. Finally, the colors, selected color, binding, and scale are used to determine the colors that will be applied to the FlexMap and the various regions within. With the variables set up, let's create the methods we'll use to load data and determine what information to display to users. Set up the components initialize method first, then the FlexMap's initialize method. In the constructor, create a variable we can use for the data service. Then, inside the components initialize method, set up the FlexMap's data source, which we'll use to assign data to different regions of the map. Let's also set the values of data map, page view map, and issues reported map, which will be used to color the map and build out the tooltips that will be displayed. Then, set up the method that will be called when the FlexMap gets initialized. This will use the mouse down event, along with FlexMap's hit test method, to track where the user clicks. If the country the user clicks on has values associated with it, emit country name gets called to emit an event containing that country's name. We're also tying an event to the map's rendered event to set the selected country based on which country the user clicks on. This event simply checks that the chosen country has a valid ID. If it does, we fill the area with the selected color. Finally, create the Emit Country, Get Country Tooltip, and Valid Country methods. Emit Country emits the country name value and will be integrated into the FlexGrid component. Get Country Tooltip is used to build out the HTML for the tooltip that gets displayed. Valid Country ensures the country is a valid country, a country that has data associated with it. The last two things to do are create a variable to capture the event that we emit and add the component that we just created into Markup. In the app.component.ts file, add a variable named selectedCountryName and a method called countryName, which sets the value of this variable. Then, set up the markup for our map info component and tie the event emitter from the map info component with the country name method that we set up so that the selected country name gets stored. Now when we run the application, we can see the FlexMap control and each colored region. If you hover over one of the valid countries, you can see a tooltip with that country's associated data. Next, let's implement the two FlexGrid components we'll use to display data on the selected country. First, generate the components by running the following commands: nggc user-info and nggc issue-info. The first component we'll generate is the user info component. This component will display data on the last 200 users who visited the site from the user-selected country. By default, we'll show the data from users visiting from the United States. Starting with the user-info.component.html file, set up two controls: the FlexGrid and the Collection View Navigator. For FlexGrid, create the control using the WJ FlexGrid tag, and then create each column to be displayed using the WJ FlexGrid column tag. Inside our platform and browser columns, create ng template elements. The FlexGrid cell template control will use these to style the interior of the cells in that column. Include the markup we want to display inside each cell. For these cells, the markup will depend on the value within the cell. So we'll use ngIf to screen the cell value and then select the appropriate markup we want to display. The Collection View Navigator allows us to include pagination with FlexGrid. To work, we must supply it with the same collection view that our grid uses. Then, FlexGrid and the Collection View Navigator will both have access to the collection view. Any changes made to the collection view by either of the controls will be mimicked across both controls, including the ability to apply paging. Next, navigate to the user-info.component.css file to apply styling. Let's add some padding and set a font size for our header, a width and margin on the FlexGrid control, and a width on our Collection View Navigator when the screen size is smaller than 800 pixels. Finally, let's create the TypeScript that will gather data to be used with the FlexGrid control for populating it. This will be implemented inside the user-info.component.ts file. After adding all the required imports, set up the collection view inside the component's constructor. Pass in data retrieved from the service. By default, we'll display data from the United States. You can set a host of other properties using the collection view, but for the purposes of this video, we'll just set the page size property to limit the number of elements shown per page to 25 items in this case. Let's also set up the onChanges method to update the FlexGrid when the selection from the FlexMap changes. Lastly, before adding this component to the dashboard, add the desired data to the data service. This data will include information on the platform and browser used, the country from which it's accessed, session duration, and IP address. When this is complete, Navigate to the app.component.html file to add the new component in Markup. When we run the application, you can see the FlexGrid and all the associated data for the currently selected country, though by default, we're viewing data from the United States. Now, to create our last component for the dashboard, the Issue Info component, navigate to the issue-info.component.html page and add the following. This is basically the same as the markup for our User Info component. We create our FlexGrid control, define the columns using the WJ FlexGrid column tag, and use FlexGrid cell template to build a column with custom content. Now, in the issue-info.component.css file, add the CSS for this FlexGrid component. With the markup and CSS complete, add the data that will populate the grid. First, create a basic array with information on the number of issues reported for each country. Then, create a method called getIssueData to return an array of information to be loaded into the grid. Inside this method, create an array of issues with information on each error that can appear. Then, create a loop to populate each list with a set of issues experienced by users from that country, and return it using the method. Lastly, set up the TypeScript that will populate the grid with data. Inside the issue-info.component.ts file, add all your required imports. Then, set up the constructor and add the ngOnChanges and initializedGrid methods. The onChanges method does the same thing as the User Info component by populating the grid with information on the currently selected country. The initializedGrid method allows us to add conditional CSS to the Datagrid based on the values of each object's properties. Finally, in the app.component.html file, add the new component. Run the application to see the rendered FlexGrid, including the tooltip notifier and the custom content. We now have a polished dashboard that provides interacting users with adequate information. Thanks to our CSS, the dashboard will be responsive and readable on any device from which it is accessed. Dashboards have become crucial tools of data analysis across many industries, enabling users to quickly make high-level business decisions based on data. Wijmo simplifies the process for developers to quickly add various controls for viewing data in multiple ways, connect the controls to data sources, and create fully operational dashboards for anyone to use. You can run this application in the browser or download the repository and run it locally through the links in the description. To learn more, visit developer.meshius.com/Wijmo.